Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I think what I'd like to do to start out is to thank Mikey for pulling this together, seriously. Would everyone who's helped Mikey pull this together stand up? Are there volunteers, staff, everybody who's helping him? What a wonderful conference this is. Wonderful conference. The synergy of these three ideas that you put together, the prongs, have brought out so many different ideas related to this. It's bigger than the sum of its parts, so thank you, Mikey. But while I'm at it, I'll ask if Rick Doblin and Roger Walsh are still here. Are you here, either of you? Roger. I would like to point out an esteemed person in our field. Roger Walsh has written many articles and edited books on Buddhism and psychedelics. And Roger, it's wonderful to have you here. Pleasure. And Adele Getty and Michael Williams, are you here? Wonderful. These folks are donors for the program and other organizations that Limna Foundation has been really helpful for. And I know there are 2 or 3 grads and students from the program in the audience. Would you all stand? Hello, everybody. These are wonderful psychotherapists and physicians. And Martin Lunn in the back is all the way from the UK. You came the farthest of anybody. Welcome. Welcome. So, given the theme that I'm most proficient in, which is meditation and psychotherapy, I'm presenting about this program in a way in which I've never done, which is to talk about the strand of mindfulness and meditation that runs through this training. And it will touch into some of the things that people have brought up already at other sessions and the unpanel we had yesterday, as well as the unpanel for today. So given that, we're going to segue in to the next slide, if this works. There we go. This is a quote that I want to bring in as a flashpoint for this whole talk, and why I'm doing this program and why the university's doing it. And this is from Eddie Hillesum. Ultimately, we have just one moral duty: to reclaim large areas of peace in ourselves, more and more peace, and to reflect it toward others. And the more peace there is in us, the more peace there will be also in our troubled world. Eddie, I'll tell you her story later, but I'd like to put that out as foreground for why we would do this work in integrating meditation and psychedelics. And this next one is just an overview of what our training program is. As you all know, you're here, so this is preaching to the choir. There's been an upsurge of interest in the last decade. There's been demonstrated therapeutic efficacy in several medical syndromes, including depression, end-of-life distress, which is anxiety and depression, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, as well as efficacy that was demonstrated 50 years ago for things like creativity and team building, and of late, psilocybin for addictions. And we need clinicians and clergy people who provide integration work for people out there in the world who are working with underground therapists, come back, have a bad trip, don't have Michael Taylor or anyone else available to speak to. And we're teaching them to help clients integrate their material in a feasible way without having done the work themselves. So it's an awkwardness because we're training our clinicians to do legal work that's in FDA-approved studies or FDA-approved clinics, but we can train them to help people who otherwise wouldn't get services in integrating the material that came up from a session that they did with someone else. It's a line we're walking. And then finally, there's now a demand for public education, for risk minimization and benefit enhancement for psychedelic usage now that there are initiatives coming out in various states, and Denver just passed its decriminalization initiative, that I think it's incumbent upon us in my field to start providing public education, which we haven't been doing. There's been some, but not that much. And it's 180 hours of the curriculum in total for us at this particular university, and it's the first in the country. It's actually the first on the planet to have an accredited university accredit a training program that's training people to be therapists and clergy and researchers for psychedelics. And we're working with licensed people, and we're partnering with MAPS and USONA and psilocybin, which are the, MAPS, Hefter, and USONA, which are the psilocybin research organizations. And I put this poem up here from David White because it has something to do with some of the values of the program, so I'll read it for you. This is from David White's Sweet Darkness. When your eyes are tired, the world is tired also. When your vision has gone, no part of the world can find you. Time to go into the dark where the light has eyes to recognize its own. There you can be sure you are not beyond love. The dark will be your home tonight. The dark will give you a horizon further than you can see. You must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in. You must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in. Give up all other worlds except the one to which you belong. Sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of your own aloneness to learn anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. Sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of your own aloneness to learn anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. We look for folks who know this to come into the program because they will be treating people who have been in their own darkness and their own aloneness, and they're needing help of one kind or another. And I'll tell you in a few moments the kinds of questions that we ask in our interviews to find people who understand what David White's talking about here. But I'm going to segue into what some of the elders in the field have talked about in terms of integrating meditation and psychedelics. And the first I'll call out is Aldous Huxley. This is a great book on a community that integrated the use of psychedelics in how they lived together. It had some positive and negative effects, so I won't be a spoiler here. But these are a couple quotes from Aldous. He's referring to moksha medicine here as a medicine, as a Sanskrit for release from samsara, release from cyclical birth and deathing. And moksha medicine is those medicines from his point of view that we're talking about here, the classic psychedelics. The moksha medicine prepares one for the reception of gratuitous graces, pre-mystical visions, or the full-blown mystical experiences. Meditation is one of the ways in which one cooperates with those gratuitous graces. By cultivating the state of mind that makes it possible for dazzling, ecstatic insights to become permanent and habitual illuminations. That's what we've been talking about off and on, how to make them permanent and habitual illuminations. Maybe it is private and there's no unitive knowledge of anything but one's own physiology. Who cares? The fact remains that the experience can open one's eyes and make one blessed and transform one's whole life. So he's sidestepping the question of whether these conscious states are epiphenomena of our physiology or whether they're a standalone that affect our physiology or both. I like the who cares part. Deep philosopher. So that's all well and good, high and mighty, but then we find ourselves on the subway and our default way of thinking comes in. We find ourselves in the pit of hell after we had a wonderful peak experience the day or two before. This guy could be any of us. So how do how do we work with meditation and psychedelics to make it more embedded in our daily life? I have 4 books to recommend to you, 2 of which are on here. The first is A Joyous Cosmology by Alan Watts. He speaks about his criteria for how to know when a medicine is valuable and helpful. He's a Buddhist scholar and teacher, for those of you who are not aware of him, and he had the audacity to take psychedelics and write about it and write his own experiences, first in 1962 and later in 1970. And Allies for Awakening by Ralph Metzner is a great compendium of recommendations for dosages, prep, integration, yogic practices you can do in alignment with your work. I highly recommend that book as well. So first is a quote from Ralph. In the mystical and the psychedelic literature, we find descriptions of psychological death rebirth experiences that are seen as the most profound and radical self-transformations. In such experiences, the preconceived, unconsciously held self-images and thoughts of who I am, whatever it is I call me, are dissolved or released like clothing we do not need to wear, with the benefit of having had a glimpse behind the veil of death into the realms of the immortals. Here's another one from a wonderful mystic physicist. I maintain that the cosmic religious feeling is the strongest and noblest motive for scientific research. I suspect Albert would be enjoying some of our conversations here this weekend. And this is from Alan Watts regarding meditation and psychedelics. A better word might be for contemplation or even centering. It's quite possible, even easy, to do this without the aid of any drug, though these chemicals have the advantage of doing it for you in a peculiarly deep and prolonged fashion. The mystical experience, whether induced by chemicals or other means, enables the individual to be so peculiarly open and sensitive to organic reality that the ego begins to be seen for the transparent abstraction that it is. This quote is grounding some of the ideas we've talked about before. This is another great book I would recommend to you, The Psychedelic Experience, written by Leary, Metzner, and Richard Alpert, now Ram Dass. Meditation is probably the best prep for a psychedelic session. Those who have spent time in the solitary attempt to manage the mind, to eliminate thought, to reach higher states of consciousness or concentration are the best candidates. When the ego-lost state occurs, they are ready. They recognize the process as an end eagerly awaited. But this can happen. Greg microdoses and sees God's elbow. So, you can get halfway there, you could get elbow way there. Is it good enough? Maybe. Certainly so. But still. Okay, so given all this, what do we do if we want to help people learn how to facilitate other people's mystical experiences, knowing there's nothing that is guaranteed? And sessions can go sideways. There's evidence we need to be very careful of adverse events, so we train for that as well. But how to go about doing this? So I wrote an article that got published a couple years ago, and just recently there's a great new book, I'll give a pitch for it, Advances in Psychedelic Medicine, that just came out, edited by Michael Winkelman and Ben Sessa. And my writings imbue this program as well as helping me think of this as a laboratory and getting feedback from students about what works and what doesn't. But these are the modules we teach to. First, we start with the hard science of neuroscience, pharmacology, and the research protocols that are typically used, which is, we've talked about already, double-blind, randomized studies, mostly with placebo. And then we talk about the practices of transformation of consciousness that have been used for millennia across the planet, things like fasting, solo wilderness journeys, community dancing together, and psychedelics. And we bring in anthropologists to help us with that. And then we talk about the competencies of the therapist, which I'll go over in a minute, and how to do the therapy. We have them do role plays, which is the in vivo part. We have them do holotropic breath work, which was developed by Stan Groff, which is a very effective way to help people get in an expanded state using the breath. How many people have done breath work of one kind or another? Oh, well, good. So you all know. You all know. How'd you find these people? In archival instruction, we look at tapes of sessions and unpack, deconstruct the sessions and talk to people about what it was done and why in that particular psilocybin session and why that MDMA session needed to go that particular way. Or if the teacher thought they could have done it differently, they will tell the students and say why. So it's a very effective way to instruct them since we can't get everyone we're training into the lab right now. And then we have mentors who are seasoned researchers or therapists in the field who will mentor with them for the next 9 months while they're in the program. And these are the types of people we let in. You can just scan that. They're all licensed, MA at least, and clergy or chaplains. And I did this because I could foresee these were the kinds of people that the FDA might approve. Some of these are not approvable right now, but they could be second therapists. There's always 2 people in the laboratory in the session room. And so the physical therapists, the TCM docs, the occupational therapists right now are not being included in the research, but as a lead therapist, but I could see them definitely being so later. But they're here because they wanted to learn the material. And these are our demographics. This gives you a little bird's eye view of the program. Average age, 41 years. That's the smattering of the type of folks who've been in our program. I think we're fairly well represented both with medical professionals and mental health professionals. I'd love to see more clergy with us. And these are the qualities that we're looking for in our therapists, that they have a grounded, empathetic, warm presence, that they've grown through a dark night of the soul of their own, so they know what it's like to go through hardship. They've reached out to others. They've taken care of themselves. They have humility and gratitude now, really important. They have a relaxed attachment to the extent that everything appears safe. This is something I got from Torsten Passy, who's an MDMA therapist in Europe. Wonderful idea. It's not quite the Buddhist total detachment from desire and aversion, but it's a relaxed enough detachment so that we don't get scared in sessions. And we convey safety and trustworthiness to the client. And then the 4th one is an introspective meditative relationship to profound topics. We actually ask our interviewees before we let them in the program, what's their philosophical stance on the meaning of life? And that's how we get it, a meditative, introspective stance. And then they also speak to us about having a felt contact with an inner core of wholeness. So we are looking for people who are healthy, but they've also gone through some difficulties. And wonderfully, we've had many more people apply than we've had room for. And this is from Dr. Fredrika Meckel, who is a psychiatrist. She works in the EU and some in the UK. The respectful use of these substances as the utmost potent unlockers of the unconscious and thankfulness for their service are conditions for this work. Says it really well right there. In the end, the ultimate gift of the substances is to be reconnected to oneself on all levels and to our environment. This reintegration is called healing. And this is what we're cooking up next. We're looking to get research approved, as MAPS has, from the FDA for our students to be therapists for each other. One session with psilocybin and one with MDMA. They'll do it as a volunteer with one another. We'll do it under the auspices legally, and it will give them a true, real experience of being a sitter while someone is on the medicine. Holotropic breathwork sitting is wonderful, but it's not the same as being with someone having a real experience. We're working with MAPS to open an expanded access clinic in San Francisco for people with PTSD. An expanded access clinic is in the third phase of drug development. People can sign a waiver that they know this is an investigational drug. It's not fully accredited or approved by the FDA yet, and they're willing to take it. And we're hoping to be able to treat a couple hundred, if we can, depending on the number of permissions we get, for first responders, people with trauma in San Francisco, and hopefully by the end of the year. And then we're looking to move to the East Coast. We have lots of people from Europe and the East Coast applying, and we're thinking of having an East Coast class. And then lastly, for our moral sense of obligation, we'd like to do public education programs in major cities on risk management. Maybe we'll start by helping people in Denver, since the initiative just passed. Someone needs to do it. I'm hoping they're planning it. But it's that kind of initiative, and it would be good for our students to have the experience. This is a wonderful film from Alan Watts, which we don't have time for me to show. So I'm gonna here. I'll take you to the end. It's really beautiful. Look at that: the cosmos, Grand Canyon, the sky. You got it. Okay, here you go. Here's the last seconds. He's talking about nothing.
Looking for.
There you go. It's really cool. Really good. So one more. Do I have one more minute? So this is related to the guy on the subway who's lost in thought. It gets really bad by stop number 5. If people have mystical experiences while walking down the street or with a psychedelic or while running a marathon, their lives are different while they're sitting on the subway. They may have those same thoughts, but they're not as pounded by it as they would have without having a mystical experience. So Rumi probably did not have any psychoactive substances as far as we know, but we do know that he did the Sufi whirling for about 36 hours straight and seemed to be a different person after that. So this comes from Rumi. The lamps are different, but the light is the same. So many garish lamps, the dying brain's lamp show. Forget about them. Concentrate on the essence, concentrate on the light. In lucid bliss, calmly smoking off its own holy fire, the light streams toward you from all things. All people, all possible permutations of good, evil, thought, passion. The lamps are different, but the light is the same. One matter, one energy, one light mind, endlessly emanating all things. One turning and burning diamond, one. Ground yourself. Strip yourself down to blind, loving silence. Ground yourself. Strip yourself down to blind, loving silence. Stay there until you see you are gazing at the light with its own ageless eyes. Stay there until you see you are gazing at the light with its own ageless eyes. So I'm bringing you back to Eddie in closing here. Eddie was a freedom fighter for Jewish people in Amsterdam who were being sent to the camps. And this is her quote for all of us. I'm thinking of Jamie's talk yesterday about our showing up for how all of what we're working on could go sideways. Ultimately, we have just one moral duty: to reclaim large areas of peace in ourselves, more and more peace, and to reflect it toward others. And the more peace there is in us, the more peace there will be in our troubled world. And I have this from Pablo Amaringo: meditators using ayahuasca or ayahuasquero drinkers doing meditation. You call it as you see it. And from Martin Luther King, last slide. It is okay for us to go to the mountain. We want to, we need to, we have a drive, we long for it. But what do we do when we need to face things such as oppression, genocides, racism, sexism, deprivations, microaggressions? Are we willing to have been on the mountaintop and face the challenges of what's presented in the world right now? I think the answer has to be yes from among us in this group. And so Martin Luther King suggests courage faces fear and thereby masters it. Cowardice represses fear and is thereby mastered by it. So I would hold that anyone training to be a lay therapist or a licensed therapist in this work needs to be willing to do just this, knowing that on the other side of the fear could be the kind of illumination that Rumi was talking about, even if it's just the elbow. So I call it out for you to be as courageous as you can be in whatever inspirations you've gotten from this conference. And we owe it to those people who don't get to hear about these things and don't have access. We owe it to get ourselves out of our bubble here and go out in the world and make a racket and make some good change and do it with love and gratitude, humility, and some robustness, because we don't have a whole lot of time if the climate change people are right. So let's get down to it, okay? Thank you. Wow. Oh, thank you. You all.